My name is James Pond. I'm 83 years old. I enlisted in Santa Ana, California on April the 12th, 1943.
Well, what year were you born?
I was born in 1925,
In which state?
California, Santa Ana, California.
Okay. And what were your parents' names?
Oh, my mother's name was Huel, H-U-E-L, Pond, and my father's name was Chauncey, and both of them were from Santa Ana also.
What did they do for a living?
My dad was a hardware salesman for many, many years, and my mother was plain old, good old housewife.
Okay. And which school did you go to?
I went to Santa Ana High School, and the war had broken out, and I felt that I was just 16, and I felt that I should be in the service. The result was my mother and father wouldn't let me join. So I had to wait until I was 17, and I hounded them to death until they finally said yes. Looking back now, I understand my mother's reluctance because my oldest brother was in the Marine Corps in the South Pacific, and my next oldest brother was in the Army heading for the Battle of the Bulge. So me being the only other one left, I'm sure that probably broke their heart in me leaving.
So there's 3 kids.
3 boys.
Okay. And then how was that? How was school during the war? What kind of things changed?
Actually, because the war was on, I really lost interest in school.
Yeah.
And that was bad. I had this feeling all the time that I belonged to doing what my brothers were doing. So what did I do? I quit school at the start of my senior year.
So you're 17 then?
I was 17,
Okay.
and I enlisted in the Navy.
And this is 1943.
Yes.
Okay. So where were you sent for basic training?
I boarded a train for, well, I must have probably back up a little bit. They asked me when I enlisted where I'd like to have boot camp, which is what Navy calls basic training.
Okay.
And they said you can either go to San Diego or Great Lakes, Illinois. And I said, well, San Diego was real close to home. I could be home in an hour and a half. I'd like San Diego. And the next thing I knew, I was on a troop train headed for Farragut, Idaho. And Farragut, Idaho was way up in the mountains at 8,000 feet, and there was a Navy base, of all things. But it was a very interesting boot camp. Here we are all green, and it is up in the mountains, and Idaho is known for their bears. And they had what they call boiler room watch all night long to make sure that the heat stayed on. So the men who were assigned had to be by themselves down in a little room outside on the main floor of the barracks and sit there on watch. And they said, be careful when you open the doors to watch out for the grizzly bears. Well, needless to say, nobody was real anxious to sit there all night.
Yeah.
So nothing particular happened, but we did see grizzly bears out on our parade ground.
So is it very cold weather there then?
No, not at that time, because I was just starting in the summertime.
Okay.
And it was very nice.
Was that a real small town, or was there a big city nearby? Never heard of
The
it.
closest town was Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which was a very small town,
Okay.
probably the size here of Grand Haven, Michigan. And the nearest town was Spokane, Washington.
Okay.
But this was far enough into the mountains that you just weren't around town. You were probably, I think we were 19 miles from town.
Okay. So what kind of things, or what kind of classes or training did you go through?
Well, they gave us, they wanted to know what we wanted to do in the Navy, and of course I said I'd like to be a signalman.
Okay.
And at the end of my basic training, they asked me where you would like to go to signal school. And I said, well, they said, where's the school? I said, well, we have one in Illinois, and we have one in San Diego, California. Well, naturally, I picked San Diego, California, and naturally, they picked to send me to Chicago, Illinois. That's when I first learned that you don't give them any answer as to where you'd like to go.
Well, how long were you in Idaho then?
I was only in Idaho about 3 months.
Okay, so it was just like
A
physical
little less than
work?
that. Basic training actually at that time was only 8 weeks.
Okay.
They needed men pretty badly in the war.
Mm-hmm.
Going to the signal school, it was being held at the big stadium called Stagg Field at the University of Chicago.
Okay.
And we had just fabulous place to stay. The dining halls were all the big, huge banquet halls with the high-back chairs. We were served on white table covers, and it was very plush. The only thing about it is where we went to school was in the lower part of the stadium, the stadium Stagg Field, and we were on the eastern end. And on the western end of Stagg Field, they had an Army radio school. And we would have to get out each day and do our calisthenics and this and that. And the Army just fiddled around doing nearly nothing. And we used to make fun of that. Later on, I'll tell you what we found out about it. But in the meantime, we also had what we called a perimeter guard. And this was 2 sailors carrying wooden rifles, not real ones, outside walking the sidewalks completely around Stagg Field as we're patrolling.
Okay.
We thought it was really stupid, and it was treated us like a bunch of little kids to have wooden rifles. Well, we didn't find out until later, after I left, sometime after I left, that the reason the Army wasn't doing much at the other end, they were developing the atom bomb. And they had a nuclear reactor there.
Uh-huh.
So basically, and that's why they gave us wooden rifles, so we didn't look like we were protecting anything.
Okay.
So that was really quite amusing afterwards.
Yeah.
I left there. I got orders then to go to Philadelphia, a naval station in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
I boarded the USS Van Valkenburg, which is a destroyer. At that time, a brand new online destroyer, never been in commission before.
So how big is a destroyer?
352 feet long.
And about how many?
Carrying a crew of about 300 to 350.
Okay.
There was one thing about the Van Valkenburg that none of us liked. When we found out who our engineering officer was, it was a lieutenant, and his last name was Van Valkenburg. Well, come to find out, his father was the captain of the Arizona, and of course he went down with the Arizona. And I think that we felt that it was going to be pretty edgy type of duty to be on the ship that was named after his father.
Uh-huh.
I felt that we might be taken advantage of at times through his own ego.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, 3 weeks after I was assigned, they had greater need, and they transferred me to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in New York, and I boarded the USS Davison, another destroyer.
Okay.
At that time, I left on my first trip.
Did you have any idea where you were going to be sent? Or they just...
That what?
Did you have any idea where you were going to be sent?
No, absolutely no idea.
Okay.
Everything then was very, very top secret. You didn't know 3 days before you got orders for transfer from one place to another. Usually it was a case of tomorrow you're going, pack up your sea bag.
When you got on the ship, were there other men that you knew that you had gone through training with, or were you kind of just...
No, I was a singular person that went out at that time.
Okay.
All my life I grew up in Southern California, and I was always interested in sailboating.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a lot of sailboating. And right away I felt that I was never going to get seasick when we went on this destroyer. And I just was sure I wouldn't. So we headed out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and we headed out, and we got out what they call off Sandy Hook, which is the last of the lighthouses going out of New York Harbor, and the swells begin to go like this, you know. I got up that morning, and I was fine, and I saw on the bulletin board your duties that I was assigned to. and I was assigned to the galley. And they took me down to the galley, and they said, "You're going to be peeling potatoes." And they said, "Here's this big cauldron that you put the potatoes in when you peel them. And this one, this is where the potatoes are waiting to be peeled, just soaking." I said, "Well, that's fine, you know." So I sat down and I started doing what I was supposed to do. Well, by the time you sit there and you watch these potatoes going up and down, up and down, I got seasick. And I was seasick for 3 days. I mean, I wanted to die. I didn't care if it was in action or not. The result was, at the end of 3 days, I was fine.
Okay.
And we were on our way at that time to Belfast, Ireland, and we were escorting a convoy. We went, in that route, we took the far northern route, which took us by Iceland and Greenland. And when we got up in that area, every morning we always were afraid of a submarine attack, which is where they usually occurred at daybreak.
Oh, okay.
Where the enemy submarine, there were the wolf packs then, that they could see a silhouette of the ships. And we had our general quarters every morning, but this particular morning, it really meant business because there was a submarine there. And we made various depth charge runs. We were escorting a convoy of probably about 40 ships. And these are all slower ships that couldn't do more than about 10 knots. And 10 knots is a speed that the enemy submarine could torpedo. Well, we did detect the enemy submarine, and we did do our depth charge runs. We thought that we got it because we got a lot of black coming up. But the problem was we never had it confirmed. You always have to have them confirmed before you call it a hit.
Okay.
We didn't have it confirmed because we were underway and we couldn't slow down, and we couldn't slow the convoy down. So we assumed that we had sunk the German submarine. Went all our way, and we got to Belfast, Ireland. And we had discharged all of our ships. And then we returned to New York City. Got back to New York, and lo and behold, they put us on another Belfast, Ireland run.
Do you know what they were doing in Ireland? Or was this just a stop on the way?
What they
to
were
Europe?
basically doing is building up troops
Okay.
for the invasion of Normandy.
So there's
And all of these
staying
ships
there.
we were carrying were cargo ships and some troop ships
Okay.
for supply. So we basically, our ship was backing up the invasion of Normandy.
Okay.
We got on this trip, and this one was unbelievably cold. We got up off the coast of Iceland, and the whole ship was just solid covered with ice. It got covered with ice so heavy that when it would roll, we were afraid of capsizing.
Oh.
And they had all of the crew out with hammers, breaking and chipping and breaking the ice off. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that. I don't know why. I never had to get out there. But we chipped all the ice off, and we made it to Belfast, Ireland again. I learned an unusual lesson at the train station in Belfast. My family has a background of Irish and English, and I've always wanted to go to Dublin, Ireland. So I decided, I saw at the train station, here was the ticket a window for Dublin, Ireland, to catch a train. Well, I had a pretty good liberty, and I thought I would go ahead and go to Dublin, Ireland for a visit. And I waited in line to get my ticket, and before I got to the window, this Irishman said, wanted to know where I was going. I said, I'm going to Dublin. He says, how come? And I said, well, I told him that I was interested because of my family. He says, well, you know, if you go to Dublin, Ireland, you can never leave. I said, what do you mean never leave? He says, well, you can't leave until the war is over because Dublin, Ireland is Southern Ireland, and that's the Irish Free State. And they remained neutral through the entire war. Okay. And a lot of service members that did want to desert did get on those trains and went to Ireland, and they were in Ireland until the war was over. and they had to face the music when the war was over.
Yeah.
So needless to say, I didn't afford to train for Dublin in Ireland.
What'd you do instead?
Well, we returned back to New York again, and then we made another convoy, and this one was to Glasgow, Scotland.
Okay.
When we came back from the trip, actually, when we came back from the trip to Ireland, though, before we took the trip to Glasgow, the ship had to go in for some repairs and go into dry dock. And they got our ship into dry dock, and lo and behold, they found a great big dent in the side, just the size of the port torpedo, with paint on it. So we had actually been torpedoed, but it was a dud.
Wow.
So that was really strikingly different.
Yeah.
At the time of those cruises, I was a signalman, and because of the Arctic sun reflecting off of the water, and sometimes we had these what they call flag hoist signals. Some of these signals lasted a half hour that you had to read them and call out to a man who transcribed them. And my eyes started going real bad.
Yeah.
I couldn't see, and next thing I know, the Commodore, we were the flagship, behind me, he was reading the signals off to our recorder, and he says, "What's the matter, son? Can't you see?" I said, "No." So they gave me a chance to go to another Class A school. You were only allowed one normally. So I decided I wanted to be a pharmacist mate, which is what is the same as an army medic.
Well, did your eyes get a little bit better after that, or have you had problems since?
No, it left me that way from there on out. There was a certain amount of burning done to the retina.
Oh, yeah.
So from there on out, I had eyes that were just marginal. I could see. And I could see well enough where in later jobs, it didn't bother me. So it probably didn't really have that much effect on my visibility today, but it did affect me.
Yeah.
So I went to Hospital Corps School in Bainbridge, Maryland.
Okay. And what year? Do you, or the date?
By that time it was probably 1944.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, I left the Davison in the first part of May of '44. The Davison was known as USS Davison DD 618. That was the number. So I went to Hospital Corps School at Bainbridge, Maryland, and I enjoyed that very much. I became a hospital corpsman. There's one major difference between hospital corpsmen and Army medics. In the Navy, nurses do not do any work themselves. They only supervised.
Okay.
In the Army, nurses actually do the work. While in the Navy, the nurses supervise and all of the corpsmen. So the corpsmen do all of the duties normally that the nurses would do, including giving shots and IVs and all of that. So I came out of that, and I decided I wanted to be a operating room technician. So I worked a little while in surgery, and then I was transferred out, and I was sent to Fort Eustis, Virginia. Now, this is a little bit of an interesting bit. Fort Eustis, Virginia was a World War I Army base, and it was all the typical one-story frame hospital wards. When we pulled in at that time, on the train, we pulled in about midnight, and there were no lights anywhere. We thought that was sort of strange that didn't see anybody. But we did see weeds about 6 feet high all over the place. The base had never been used since World War I. And all of a sudden, they had commissioned it as a naval hospital. U.S. Naval Hospital, Fort Eustis, Virginia. So at the hospital there, I had duty for some time, and it's real interesting because our patients began coming in after we got the weeds cut down and we got some lights. We didn't have the lights yet, but in time we did. And the trains began arriving and bringing in wounded Marines, still some of them in battle dressings from the West Coast. and we were getting train loads of Marines shot up from Guadalcanal.
Okay.
So we were busy real quick.
All kinds of injuries or just specific?
All kinds of injuries, including metal.
Okay.
I did most of my work there in the actual injury wards, but I did have a time where I was at the very beginning, that I was in the psychiatric ward. And that was sort of scary because I had night duty and we had no lights. And some of these fellows were pretty weird.
Yeah.
Some of them waking up screaming and this and that. So I did that a very short time, and then I got my orders again because my brother had been shot up in the Battle of the Bulge, and I felt guilty that I was sitting here sort of plush in the U.S. So I volunteered for the Fleet Marine Forces because the Marine Corps doesn't have their own medics for medical uses. The Navy are their medics.
Okay.
And the Navy are their frontline medics that are on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I volunteered, and it just didn't take any time at all. 3 weeks later, I had my bags packed, and I was on my way on a train to San Bruno, California,
Mm-hmm.
which is a point of debarkation and amphibious training base to go out to the South Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing I knew, I was on the USS Bingham, a troop transport, and we were headed for Okinawa. And they had just had the invasion, so I was headed there to back up and work with the Battle of Okinawa. We were out about, I guess, 3 weeks
To get
when
there?
the atom bomb was dropped.
Okay.
And when the atom bomb was dropped, the war was over by the time, a little while after the second one was dropped. And we knew the war was over, so we were feeling quite grateful the fact that we were going to Okinawa, because that was a terrible battle.
So you were on the ship still when the bombs had been dropped? Or you were in Okinawa?
Oh no, I was on the boat. I was on the troop transport
Okay.
when the bomb was dropped. Hadn't arrived yet in
And
Okinawa.
how did you hear the news? Was it on the radio? Or?
Yeah, we didn't get it on the radio, but it was passed down from the bridge that the war was over. The ship had received it.
Mm-hmm.
We were still at like battle stations all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was sent to Fleet Hospital 116 on Okinawa,
Mm-hmm.
and they were just building that hospital, a 1,500-bed tent hospital. And while I was there, in one more week, we were supposed to occupy and commission the base. We had one of the most horrendous hurricanes strike at that time that they've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
I spent some time sheltering in a cave, and part of my time sheltering with a family in Okinawan family.
Mm-hmm.
The Okinawan people were accustomed to hurricanes, and on one side, on the hurricane side, where it comes in from, they have constructed big stone walls
Okay.
right next to their little houses.
Right.
And that protected their houses. Well, I was in there with the whole family. But anyway, it was such a terrible storm. Right there in Brown Beach in Okinawa, we had the largest of all Quonset huts ever made. And it was huge, and it was the Fleet Post Office. And the hurricane was so bad, it just wiped that right out. It totally destroyed our entire hospital completely. And I think, well, boy, I've had about enough of this. Well, after the hurricane was over, we had to eat like what they call MREAs today, but it was K rations in my day. They weren't good at all. But we would sit on rocks, and then we're eating our 3 meals a day. During that time, they had work details, and a little amusing thing happened. I woke up one morning and I was on a detail with 6 other men, and we were assigned to get picks and shovels and dig a little ditch across this road, and they wanted a little ditch like maybe about a foot wide and about 2 feet deep to run a pipe underneath it.
Okay.
Well, this is a dirt road, and Okinawa is really coral and rock. And we had picks and shovels. Well, we got out there, and of course, usually you think of trying to some kind of excuse to get out of it. And one fella said, hey, there's a big tractor over just the other side of the hill over there. Let's get the tractor and dig the trench for the tractor. None of us knew how to drive. One little fellow says, yeah, he says, I'm a farm boy. He says, I can drive any tractor. Mm-hmm. So we stole the tractor, and it was a great, big, huge bulldozer. And next thing you know, he's coming over the hill driving this big, big bulldozer. And the only thing I knew is somebody said it was called a D9. Well, I've since found out D9 was one of the biggest that Caterpillar made. So we decided to come down the road and drop the blade and dig the ditch. We wouldn't have to do it ourselves the hard way. Well, never dreaming that the minute you drop the blade and the tractor's going forward, we scooped out a hole that must have been at least 15 feet wide before it could get the blade back up again, and a foot deep. Well, we knew we were in big, big trouble then. So we took, and we told them that we did it with a tractor, and where did we get the tractor? So we said, well, what are we going to do with the tractor? And he says, I'll get rid of it. So he drove it over the hill. The next thing I know, he said, I just started it up and let it go. We never knew whatever happened to that tractor. It must have just kept going no matter what was in its path. Some of the little things that you do. Another little thing happened. I had always liked animals, and I heard that at the Yantan Army Air Base on the other end of the island, they had a dingo dog, which is an Australian wild dog,
yeah,
that had bred with one of their dogs there, and they had puppies.
Uh-huh.
And I got a hold of them and said if I could have one of the puppies, and they said yeah. So I went down
for free?
To get the puppy. In coming back, as another fellow went with me, and boy, we couldn't get a ride. Nobody seemed to be coming a long way. It was about 15 miles away. And I even hate to say this in front of your camera, but I'm going to have to say it. We were passing this army base, and we borrowed one of their trucks. An Army
Borrowed?
Yes. They called that in the Navy midnight small stores, but it was an appropriation. We appropriated one of their 4x4 trucks.
Okay.
That they didn't know they had left the keys in.
Mm-hmm.
And we drove it back to the base. Well, we got to the base, well, what are we going to do with the truck? Well, we just park it outside there. We went to sleep. Well, the next morning we realized, we got up and looked, and here's the big U.S. Army on the blasted all over the side of this truck, and we didn't know what to do about it. So we finally, one of the fellows took one of the trucks and drove it out and abandoned it outside the base. They call that grand theft auto in civilian life, but we didn't steal anything from the government. We just moved it from one place to another.
Right.
Okay.
You needed it. Can I ask, when you first arrived, was there a lot of evidence of the invasion, like destruction, or what was the island like?
When I did what?
When you first arrived there, was there a lot of evidence of the invasion?
On Okinawa?
Yeah.
I didn't see any of the action there,
Mm-hmm.
because it had stopped. Yes, there was all kinds of evidence. There were dead Japanese hanging over the rocks and this and that at that time.
What about the infrastructure?
I was not where there was any infrastructure at all. The closest town was the biggest town on Okinawa, which was Naha, and I never even saw it.
Okay.
I was kept pretty close there. We had something occur on Okinawa, which was my closest thing to combat. We were on a squad, and we were looking for Japanese that were hidden in the caves. And we passed this one cave and didn't think anybody was there, and a shot rang out, and one of the fellows with us was shot right through the head. The Japanese just wouldn't quit. there were miles and miles and miles of tunnels under the area, just like it was on Saipan in Iwo Jima. And so he did shoot one of our people. The man happened to sleep bunk right above me. I remember that so well, and it was a few days later that I got orders and I was transferred again, and that there was a ship in the harbor that needed a pharmacist mate. At that time I was what they call a third-class petty officer then, a pharmacist mate. And there had no doctor aboard. And with my training, they felt that I was qualified to be the ship's doctor. Well, we had 56 men and officers, and I was the doctor aboard. But then when we got ready to go underway, we were underway with another PGM, our same size. Come to find out, they didn't even have a pharmacist mate. Now the reason being, the moment the war was over, all of the servicemen were returning. Doctors were in extreme short supply in the United States, and had all these servicemen coming back, so they had to shoot the doctors back to the States. So I was aboard this PGM, and I was the ship's doctor. We were there probably 3 days when I came aboard, and then we upped anchor, and we headed for Sasebo, Japan.
Okay.
At that time, of course, now Japan was occupied. They had dropped the bomb in Hiroshima. So I was in Sasebo, Japan for a few months. And then we got underway and we went to Nagasaki, Japan, where the bomb was dropped.
What were you doing in Sasebo? Were you actually staying on the...
I was staying on the ship. And Sasebo, because I made friends with the people. Our ship was tied up at a dock right near the little village. And you walk out a little ways and you had the houses on the hill. And I saw some people who needed some medical help, and I told them if they'd come down to the ship the next morning, I'd take care of them. And lo and behold, the next morning there were 5 instead of 2. So I took care of the 5, and the following morning there must have been 10 or 15. And there was one little baby with cradle cap, real bad, so bad that the head was just nothing but scabs. And they had no medication left in Japan at all. And I treated that little baby for several weeks, and finally got it cured. The only thing we didn't have penicillin even then. We had sulfa drugs.
Yeah.
And the family were so grateful. They had me come to their house and fix me dinner. They gave me an old family heirloom rifle that must have been 100 years old. They made shoes for me and did everything possible. And it was really very gratifying. I loved the Japanese people. There were some of our men who held the grudge forever. But I just said to myself, they were in the service just like me. Maybe they didn't want to be. So anyway, I love the Japanese people. They're great people, and clean as can be. So I stayed there on the ship, and I did go into town, but town was blown up. It was gone at Nagasaki. And so this was only about a month after the bomb was dropped. So we spent a week there in Nagasaki, which like everybody says, even my family doctors was, well, did you get any radiation? Well, I don't know, but I've had 25 or 30 skin cancers taken off since I was, and all of them were cancerous. Finally, I got my orders. Before I got my orders, I had enough points. At that time, you had to have points to be discharged. You probably heard this from other people you've interviewed. I had enough points, and they kept me 9 months later beyond my points. And you got your points for how long you'd been at sea duty and how long you'd been away from the States. So, but because of the shortage of medical people, they kept me 9 months later.
So you said you were sent to another area of Japan after that?
No, I stayed right there in Sasebo.
Oh.
The ship went to Nagasaki.
Oh, okay.
And at Nagasaki, how was this? Our ship got orders to go to the island of Samar in the Philippines, and there was a big naval base. And we went to Samar, and my orders came in for discharge. At that time, I still had my little dog that I got from Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
And the little dog I'd named him Kachi, which is in Okinawan, or Japanese, is Candy.
Okay.
And I had the little dog with me, and the night before I was to board the troop ship to go home, I had to tie the little dog to the steps outside. They wouldn't let me take it in the barracks. And I had him tied with a leather thong, and the next morning that thong had been cut with a knife,
Stole him?
and the dog was gone. And I felt really bad about that. I mean, tears really watered up in my eyes. I wanted to bring that dog home. Then I found out that the Filipinos eat dogs. There weren't any dogs running loose at all in the Philippines. They ate the dogs. So I know what happened to my dog. But anyway, at Samar, I boarded the USS Typhoon, which is a troop ship, and we headed back to the United States. The one thing I'll never forget, we pulled into San Francisco, and everybody had literally forgotten there was a war. They were so busy involved, in getting things back together.
Uh-huh.
There were no welcoming bands or anything like that, and the American Red Cross was there. And I'm a little reluctant to say this, but I'm going to. I went down to the American Red Cross, and they had free coffee, but if you wanted a donut, it cost you a nickel. And they wouldn't give you a donut. You had to buy the donut. And a lot of us got a really bad feeling in our mouth about that.
Yeah.
Which is carried over all the way to this day.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, finally, I boarded a train heading for home, and at the naval base in Long Beach, California, which is 9 miles from where I lived, I got a ride with a Navy lieutenant out of the main gate. I still hadn't talked to any American women at all. No liberties, no nothing. They wouldn't let you out until you were discharged.
Right.
And the lieutenant gave me a ride, and he dropped me off just 2 blocks from our house, where I lived.
Mm-hmm.
And right on that corner was the old ice cream malt shop. And even before going in to see my parents, I had to go in and I had to get myself a malt. And this real pretty little blonde waited on me. I felt that I was falling in love right there. That night, after going home, I went right back to the place at 7 o'clock at night, and I had another malt.
Mm-hmm.
5 weeks later, I married that little waitress.
Wow.
We were married 12 and a half years.
Mm-hmm.
We got a divorce, and I got this attorney who was going to get the divorce, and he had a little secretary, and she was a real beauty. 6 weeks after my divorce was final, I married my attorney's secretary. We've been married, it'll be 50 years at the end of this month.
Nice. So,
I will add one thing, before I forget, she had 3 children. I had 3 children, she had 2 children. I adopted her 2 children, and because of my love for the Asian people, we adopted a Korean girl,
mm-hmm.
brought her from Korea, and 3 years later we adopted a second Korean girl.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to add that.
You have a lot of kids.
Both grown-up girls now, I'm very proud of them.
What date, do you know the date you were discharged then?
I was discharged on April 26th of 1946.
Okay. And so you got married shortly after that. Did you start working right away or going to school or anything?
Oh, I guess I can add quite a bit there. I got my old job back at that time, which I used to be a butcher boy, and the little grocery store hired me back, and I worked there for about 5 or 6 months. Then I became a police officer on the City of Vernon, California Police Department. I stayed there about 9 months, and I got my call to the City of Compton, California Police Department. I'd already had my application in. So I stayed at the City of Compton Police Department for just under 4 years. And because it's so close to Los Angeles, we wanted to get out of that area, I put in my application for the Orange County Sheriff's Office, which everybody's heard of Orange County in California, especially since Irvine is there. I got my call to the Sheriff's Office in 1952, and I stayed at the Sheriff's Office as a patrolman until 1958, and because of my Navy background in medicine and my police background, there was an opening for deputy coroner of the county, and I became deputy coroner of Orange County. And I was deputy coroner of the county for the next 6 years, which is also part of the sheriff's office.
Okay.
I carried 2 badges at the time, so it was the same thing as being on the sheriff's office. And finally, my wife being from Grand Rapids, Michigan, we moved to Michigan. And she comes.
Okay, so what year did you move here, or Grand Rapids?
We moved here in 1964. And you want me to follow up what I've done?
Yeah.
Okay, I moved here in 1964, and I took a job selling real estate. And I sold real estate for 16 years, and I became the president and general manager of the Westdale Company real estate firm, and I was the general manager of the Lansing, Michigan division.
Okay.
I stayed there until 16 years, until 1980. And the bottom fell out of real estate. The interest rates were at 23.5%, and you couldn't instill a feeling of people how to sell real estate.
Yeah.
So I got out of real estate, and
I'll let you go, just get your date straight.
it's been taped.
Oh, that's fine.
And so for something else to do, I went to work for the Aflac Insurance Company.
No, you moved
That has the duck.
to North Carolina in
Okay.
1980.
Yes, we did. We moved to North Carolina.
Why, was that for the job, or?
No.
No, just out of choice.
Okay.
And I went to work for Aflac, and I was district managers of several different districts, and I stayed with Aflac for 20 years. And a great company.
You worked in North Carolina the whole time?
I worked in North Carolina the whole time.
Okay.
Now, we have been great people for moving. So we moved 18 times, and each time we bought a house, moved into it, we sold a house. So we finally decided we want to make Michigan home again, because we had moved to North Carolina, and then we moved to Virginia, and we moved back to North Carolina, and this time we moved here. But we said, as long as we are going to live in North Carolina and in Grand Rapids, why don't we live where it's really God's country and live right in Grand Haven? So this is where we are.
So what year did you retire then?
I retired in 2000.
Okay, and is that right when you moved to Michigan?
Yes. Yes. No, we didn't. No, we moved to Virginia.
Oh.
And we stayed in Virginia about 3 years and moved then back to North Carolina again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what have you been doing then since you moved here and retired?
I have been retired totally. Haven't worked again. Enjoying it very much. Yes.
Do you ever go to any World War II reunions or see any old friends?
I went to 2 reunions. I went to one reunion of the USS Davison, the destroyer I was aboard, and I went to a reunion of the USS PGM-28, where I was the ship's doctor aboard. Yeah. I guess I can say that I was never a hero. I was never in great battles, but I sure did get to see a lot of the world.
Yeah.
I was in every theater of war they had. Yeah.
Did you have any other interesting stories or funny tales that you wanted to tell? I don't think I have any more questions.
No, if I told any other stories, it'd be when I was deputy coroner.
Okay. Stop it then.